I'm Laura Trevelyan in New York City, and this is BBC World News America. The Queen's coffin has arrived at Buckingham Palace. Applause and cheers broke out as the hearse made its way through the gates of the palace, having travelled by plane from Scotland. The Queen's coffin will move to Westminster Hall on Wednesday, where the Queen will lie in state for 4 days. Meanwhile, King Charles's tour of the UK continued. He was in Northern Ireland, meeting political leaders, including those from the Republican Party, Sinn Féin. Significant gains, but does Ukraine really have the upper hand in the conflict with Russia? Welcome to our viewers on PBS and around the world. Queen Elizabeth II's coffin has arrived at Buckingham Palace from Scotland. Despite the pouring rain, huge crowds lined the roads on the journey into London from RAF Northolt. Traffic came to a standstill as people pulled up to watch the Queen's hearse pass by. The coffin will stay at the palace overnight before moving to Westminster Hall in central London, where the Queen will lie in state for 4 days. Members of the public will be able to pay their respects. Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell has our first report.
And so to London on a dull September evening in an aircraft of the Royal Air Force with the call sign Kitty Hawk, the call sign of any military aircraft carrying Her Majesty the Queen. Waiting on the tarmac, a very new British Prime Minister in the dark clothes of mourning. Just as there had been all those years ago when Winston Churchill had been at another airfield to receive the young Elizabeth as she arrived in London for the first time as Queen. At RAF Northolt tonight, the Queen's coffin was borne from the aircraft on the shoulders of a bearer party from the Queen's Colour Squadron of the RAF. Watching the Princess Royal, she'd travelled with the coffin for its entire journey from Balmoral. To have done so, she said, had been an honour and a privilege. And witnessing the love and respect shown by so many to her mother had been both humbling and uplifting. The honour guard from the RAF stood to attention. In steady rain, the state hearse, with its escort of police outriders, began the journey into the centre of London. As the motorcade made its way through the gathering dusk, traffic pulled over on the motorway. Many thousands stood in the rain. West London came largely to a halt. On pavements and gantries and flyovers, the citizens of Britain's capital took these first moments of the late Queen's return to demonstrate their affection and their gratitude. The journey brought them to the heart of London, to streets and landmarks that the Queen knew so well. Down Park Lane to Hyde Park Corner, and then onto Constitution Hill. Finally to Buckingham Palace, where the Queen's coffin will rest for one final night. Within the palace were the King and Queen Consort and the Queen's other children, grandchildren and their spouses, together with other members of the family. These were to be private moments for the family before the Queen's coffin leaves their loving custody to be handed over to the nation for the lying in state. Rehearsals for the ceremonial processions have been taking place in the early hours of the morning. Carefully laid plans are being put into practice as London and the nation get ready for the final farewell to a most revered monarch. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
Meanwhile, King Charles III and Camilla, the Queen Consort, have been in Northern Ireland as part of a tour of the UK. They met crowds at Hillsborough Castle ahead of a meeting with political leaders. King Charles pledged to follow in the footsteps of his late mother and seek the welfare of Northern Ireland's people. Our special correspondent, Alan Little, sent this report.
It is his 40th visit to Northern Ireland, so he knows the village of Royal Hillsborough well. But this is the first time his car has flown the royal standard of the sovereign. The warmth of the public welcome was unmistakable. This is what this tour of the nations is for: direct engagement, informal and relaxed, between the new monarch and the people. They lingered, devoting more time to this than the formal schedule allowed. His late mother famously remarked that she had to be seen to be believed. Public visibility is already a hallmark of the new reign. This, a gesture of gratitude for the flowers left in tribute to the Queen. The royal residence at Hillsborough has been at the heart of British and Irish affairs for centuries. As they entered for the first time as King and Queen Consort, 206 Ulster Battery Royal Artillery fired a 21-gun salute. But inside there was no disguising the tensions that still prevail here, and which have suspended the Northern Ireland Assembly and devolved government. As dignitaries waited in the throne room, subdued, quiet.
And I think we're all very saddened by our loss.
The King greeted Northern Ireland's party leaders. Sinn Féin's Michelle O'Neill spoke to him of his late mother's contribution to the peace process.
She played a great role here in terms of reconciliation and building our peace, so it's the end of an era for sure.
Those sentiments were echoed more formally in an event that would once have been inconceivable here.
During this period of public mourning,
in the throne room at Hillsborough Castle, the Speaker of the Northern Ireland Assembly, Sinn Féin's Alex Maskey, addressed the King with these words.
Queen Elizabeth was not a distant observer in the transformation and progress of relationships in and between these islands. She personally demonstrated how individual acts of positive leadership can help break down barriers and encourage reconciliation. Queen Elizabeth showed that a small but significant gesture, a visit, a handshake, crossing the street, or speaking a few words of Irish can make a huge difference in changing attitudes and building relationships.
In reply, the King said he would follow what he called his mother's shining example.
She never ceased to pray for the best of times for this place and its people, whose stories she knew, whose sorrows our family had felt, and for whom she had a great affection and regard. My mother felt deeply, I know, the significance of the role she herself played in bringing together those whom history had separated, and in extending a hand to make possible the healing of long-held hurts.
At St Anne's Cathedral in Belfast, people from all faiths joined the King and Queen Consort in a service of reflection for the life of Queen Elizabeth. It is the burden of the monarch to seek to unify, to stake out common ground on which to resolve differences. And here, where the legitimacy of the crown itself is challenged, the differences remain stark. Liz Truss sat beside the Irish Taoiseach Micheál Martin, engaged in conversation, for they too have differences to resolve. That the new reign has begun with visits to Scotland, Northern Ireland and, on Friday, Wales, is a statement of intent. An intention to put the future of the Union at the heart of his purpose as king. At a time when many of the traditional bonds of union are weakening, to draw the four nations of the kingdom into a cohesive whole. Alan Little, BBC News, Belfast.
Canada's Governor-General Mary Simon has described the rule of King Charles III as a renewed beginning to deal with fundamental issues. That includes what are seen as dark chapters in the relationship between the monarchy and the Indigenous people of Canada. Governor-General Simon is the first Indigenous person to represent the Crown in Canada. She spoke to our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, in Ottawa about her affection for Queen Elizabeth.
Her leadership has always brought calmness to any discussions that we've had and an understanding of what Canada was all about. In fact, she said her second home was Canada, and she didn't shy away from commenting on issues that were, for instance, related to Indigenous peoples in Canada. Colonization has been a big issue confronting Indigenous communities. Residential schools have been a huge issue confronting Indigenous communities and the country.
Where the Indigenous children were forcibly taken away from their parents and forced to study in these schools?
In these residential schools, yes. It was a very traumatic, horrific experience for many students. And I think that all plays into the conversation of colonization, of the relationship between the Crown and Indigenous peoples. Not just in Canada, but in other parts of the world as well, especially in some of the Commonwealth countries.
As you know, there have been repeated calls, including many this year, to the Queen to apologize, to offer reparations for this history. Could she have done more?
She was loved by Canadians and Indigenous Canadians. But at the same time, people recognized that the institution itself had to deal with some of these complex issues that you're talking about. And those complex issues within the institution continue to be there. Knowing that the King Charles, when he was here, really did talk about those issues. I just believe that having been part of the conversations a few months ago, that the King will be ready to have further discussions.
Could it be a new beginning with King Charles III?
I think it's a renewed beginning. It's a huge issue for us right now. And the fact that the King has said that it's a fundamental issue, yes, hopefully this will be a renewed process for us.
The Governor-General of Canada there, speaking to the BBC's Lise Doucette. While a period of mourning is also underway in Jamaica, the former British colony, which the Queen went to every single decade until her Golden Jubilee. Jamaica's Prime Minister says her passing marks a new beginning for the country. In recent years, support has grown for a referendum on whether to become a republic. From Kingston in Jamaica, Neda Tawfiq reports.
Jamaica, a mountainous island rich in beauty with an outsized cultural influence. But not far from the popular tourist spots are communities struggling with crime and hardship. Trenchtown in West Kingston was the home of Bob Marley, the birthplace of reggae music. It was also a regular stop for the royals on their visits, including Queen Elizabeth, who would view urban projects and community centers partly funded by the British government. Her passing has prompted difficult discussions in this neighborhood about her legacy and poverty's roots in colonialism.
The average earnings of a Caribbean person in terms of how much I take home per week for the pay is like $50 US. Think about that. How much can $50 US do? With British colonialism in the past, they should have done more for the people in Jamaica.
Because then we just had like makeshift houses where people build their own houses with out of wood and stuff.
Dr. Howard Harvey understands the frustrations on the street. He made his way from here wiping windscreens to earning his doctorate. But he doesn't believe Jamaica is ready to break from the monarchy.
If you're not equipped with all the competencies to be able to handle all the different stress that comes with a republic, all the different challenges, it can push you back.
Jamaicans have been wrestling with whether or not to become a republic for decades. Recently, though, changing views of the monarchy and the global reckoning on racial injustice has swayed many. Polling suggests more than 50% of people here support the move.
Jamaicans are waking up.
Republicans in Jamaica say the monarchy is a relic of the past that simply doesn't fit in today's world.
If we're serious about a democracy, and that's the discussion going on in the Commonwealth, Do you want a head of an international organization like the Commonwealth with an unelected head?
It's a sentiment that goes beyond these shores. Jamaica could be the first, and maybe not the last, member of the Commonwealth to sever its ties under King Charles. Neda Tawfiq, BBC News, Kingston, Jamaica.
Let's turn to Ukraine now, where President Zelensky is urging his Western allies to speed up deliveries of weapons to help his troops consolidate control of the territory they've seized back from Russia. After Ukraine's counter-offensive over the last few days, analysts say Moscow has largely given up land gained around Kharkiv in the northeast, and Russian troops have been pulled back over the border. Our correspondent James Waterhouse reports from the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv.
A hug made in the Kharkiv region. This mother tells her son, "I was waiting for you. I knew you would come." Her wait has felt long. Separation and Russian occupation has been painful. In this northeastern part of the country, Russia is being forced to let go as Ukraine retakes what was stolen. It means the town of Balaklia is now able to heal.
I live nearby. Our troops approached very smartly. The Russians were shocked and were running away fast. I was telling our soldiers, thank you very much.
150,000 people have been liberated here, according to authorities, and that represents a breakthrough.
The aim is to completely liberate the region and other territories occupied by the Russian Federation. Right now, there is still fighting in Kharkiv region. The cities Ukrainian forces have entered are still going through stabilization measures.
Regardless, Ukraine is using its successes to try and get longer-term security guarantees from Western allies. Russia says it's fighting back. Yet today didn't exclude a diplomatic path.
Our priority remains the promotion of sustainable relations with all international partners on the basis of mutually respectful cooperation.
The negotiating table is still far away. However, Russia's losses have brought it a bit closer. James Waterhouse, BBC News in Kyiv.
Well, state television in Moscow is reporting that Russian troops were forced to leave the Kharkiv region of Ukraine because of an onslaught by enemy forces. But in an interview with a Russian politician, the BBC has heard a rare admission that the so-called special operation was a mistake and that the Ukrainian army is practically impossible to defeat. Our Russia editor Steve Rosenberg reports from Moscow.
In Ukraine, Russia's still fighting. The Kremlin says there's no change of plan. But Russia's retreat from northeast Ukraine suggests the special operation is in trouble. From a war reporter on state TV, a rare admission. Russia has taken heavy casualties. And on another channel, rare public criticism. The politician says those people who convinced Putin the special operation would be over quickly, they took us for a ride. He called for peace talks with Kyiv. Following his TV appearance, Boris Nadezhdin told me the special operation had been a big mistake.
We want to defeat Ukrainian army. It seems like it's practically impossible because it's strong army, really strong army, and Ukrainians are supported by practically all the European countries.
I asked Russia's deputy foreign minister, with his country losing ground in Ukraine, was it time to admit that the invasion had been a miscalculation? Clearly not.
We're moving forward steadily and consistently to fulfill all the tasks of the special military operation. As we've said several times, they will be achieved.
But Moscow claims this is now a wider conflict with the West.
The authorities here want Russians to believe that in Ukraine, Russia isn't just battling the Ukrainian army, that it's up against the combined might of America, Europe and NATO. In other words, that Russia is David against the Goliath of the West. It's a message that's designed to deflect criticism away from the Kremlin for any setbacks on the battlefield. Moscow feels like a world away from the battlefields of Ukraine. Here, there are mixed feelings over Russia's retreat. We shouldn't have started this war, Yelena tells me. Thank God they pulled back. Let people in Ukraine live in peace. But Marina says, if Britain, America and Europe hadn't interfered in Ukraine, none of what's going on now would be happening. The calm in the capital is deceptive, because what happens next in Ukraine will have consequences for the whole of Russia. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
In other news now, Azerbaijan says 50 of its military personnel were killed in overnight clashes with Armenian forces. Earlier, Armenia said it had lost 49 of its soldiers in the fighting in the border area. The US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, has held separate calls with the leaders of both countries. The celebrated film director Jean-Luc Godard has died aged 91. He spearheaded the new wave of French cinema, making over 25 films. His best-known movies include Breathless, The Little Soldier, A Woman is a Woman and Alphaville. Thousands of people have gathered in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, to watch the inauguration of the new president, William Ruto. A stadium which seats 60,000 people was full of supporters from all over Kenya, together with 20 heads of states from across Africa. Emmanuel Agunza now reports.
And with that marked the transfer of power and the beginning of the presidency of William Ruto, Kenya's new president. Tens of thousands of people thronged the capital's main stadium, some arriving here as early as 3 a.m. By early morning, the stadium was filled to capacity, forcing police to lock out thousands more outside, but that did not dampen the carnival mood here. In his first speech as president, William Ruto promised a new start for the country.
We anchored our campaign on the platform of the economy premised on job creation and the well-being of the people of Kenya, and we have been working continuously on the measures to bring down the cost of living. The cost of living challenges are related in our respectful submission to production. Our strategy to bring down the cost of living is predicated on empowering producers.
More than 20 heads of state from the region attended the inauguration ceremony. Well, this behind me is the first military parade in honor of new President William Ruto. It's been a celebration that has been marked by military tradition and also an enthusiastic crowd that cheered throughout. But the hard work begins now. On top of his agenda is a struggling economy that's been battered by the COVID-19 pandemic, high cost of living and unemployment. He also has to grapple with a large public debt that now stands at $72 billion. President Ruto has also often faced accusations that his manifesto is not strong on tackling corruption. His own deputy Rigathi Gachagua has had more than 200 million Kenya shillings frozen for allegedly being proceeds of corruption. President Ruto has pledged a clean break from the past regime as he begins to implement his pledge to rebuild the country. His first test will be the identity of the people he picks in his cabinet. Emmanuel Igunza, BBC News, Nairobi.
And just before we go tonight, we'll show you those pictures of Queen Elizabeth II's coffin as it arrived at Buckingham Palace from Scotland this evening, where it will stay overnight. Large crowds braved the rain to watch as the state hearse carried the coffin, draped in the Royal Standard, into central London. It was accompanied on the flight from Scotland by the late Queen's daughter, the Princess Royal. On Wednesday, the Queen's coffin will move to Westminster Hall, where the Queen will lie in state for 4 days. The new King, Charles III, and the Queen Consort spent the day in Northern Ireland as part of a tour of the United Kingdom. I'm Laura Trevelyan. Thank you so much for watching BBC World News America.
Hello. After the recent very high September temperatures we've seen across parts of Europe, including southwest France,